me now? Now you can hear me. Okay, good. All right, if we can get Freddie Daughtry and Byron Wilkes to sit down, and Clarence, we might get started sometime tonight. How's everybody doing? Everybody doing good? All right. It's a beautiful night to be here to study the Bible together. If you would make your way to Judges chapter 6, we'll be there tonight. To kind of get us all on the same track, once Israel entered the promised land, they didn't do what God told them to do. They didn't do exactly what God told them to do. Sometimes they did part of what God told them to do. Other times they didn't do any of what God told them to do. And that leaves us with kind of a human question. How many of us sometimes just do part of what we know to do and not do the whole thing? Or how many of you are guilty of sometimes just not doing what you know is right at all? Now, I fall into both camps now. I sometimes don't do quite enough to say I did the whole thing. Sometimes I don't even attempt to do anything. And so this is kind of the history of Israel. They wandered in the desert for 40 years. It took them 40 years to make an 11-mile trek, all because of disobedience. And what did God do to that generation of Israelites? He let them die in the desert, hoping, I guess is the word, that the new generation would occupy the promised land and just be wonderful. But what started at the very beginning when they entered the promised land? Those people are so big over there, there is just no way we can occupy that land. And so Israel started this slow downward cycle of doing half things. Y'all know what I started to say, right? Half things. Or doing nothing that God told them to do. And so these little tribes, how many tribes, I forget, how many tribes of Israel were there? Did you say 12? You are a good girl. 12 tribes, and they all operate as tribes. This is the problem that the United States has and other countries that are tribal. We are nationalists, mostly. We rally to the flag. We write songs about the flag. We are unified, even though we have differences. We still, for the most part, we will stand up for our national pride. Is that fair to say? But in tribal countries, there is no sense of nationalism. There is no sense of rallying to the flag. It's all, if it's good for the tribe, it's good. If it's not good for the tribe, it's not good, even though it may be good for all the other tribes. So that makes sense? So when I was in Iraq, our political system did not understand that you can call them a democracy, you can call them a nation that's united, you can give them a president, if you will, you can give them a structure like ours, but that don't mean that they're going to rally to the flag. And so I would go to the Iraqi Ministry of Defense every day because I was an advisor in Iraq. And I'd listen to the Iraqis, and then I'd go back and I'd listen to the coalition forces. We called them the White Eyes. White Eyes meant that I was talking to the Danish Army, the Danish Navy. My Boy Scout troop was bigger than all that. Talking to the Australians, talking to the Lithuanians, and whoever else was there, because we were a united League of Nations, if you will, trying to rebuild Iraq. And so with all the collective brain power we had from the Brits, the Aussies, the Americans, we didn't get the one fundamental thing that was important. That no matter how the advisors like myself would try to guide these army generals, as soon as we left, some guy came in with a long robe and sat down and undid every bit of it because he was the leader of the tribe. And so tribal things become problematic because it's all about tribal interests. And so what happened to Israel, once they got in the promised land, and once God started to push them into place, if you will, they started looking out for their own interests. And so they wouldn't do exactly what God said they would do part. They didn't subdue and destroy their enemies. They would keep part of them as a workforce, make them slave labor. Now, let's just take it back. What were they in Egypt? They were slaves. So what did they do when they got to the promised land? They said, look out, we know what it is to be on the other side of that. And so we're going to have people to do some of that too. So if you go back and read the early chapters of Judges, you'll find out that they would conscript them to servitude. They would make them work. And so Israel, the problem with all this is now they have thumbed their nose at Jehovah God, at Yahweh. Even though God is the one who delivered them from Egypt, brought them through the desert, put them in the promised land. And now they are wanting to be like the people that's already in the land. So by not doing exactly what God told them, they allowed the people around them, they became immersed in the culture of the enemy. Does that make sense? And so you see this downward spiral of every time they embrace husbands, wives of what would be the enemy, all the Canaanites, Perizzites, Hittites, all these people, ultimately they also take their idol gods. And so not only have they not done what God called them to do, not only have they done half of what God told them to do, but now they have immersed themselves in the culture around them to include the worship of those pagan gods. Y'all following the story so far? So what did God do? God said, well, I'm going to deliver them, but I'm going to use judges to do it. And that's where we started last week. He uses judges. Now, these judges weren't necessarily chosen because they were upstanding moral people. Matter of fact, they really weren't that at all. What were they? They were leaders that could muster an army. They were leaders that could put down an enemy. And so God allowed the judges to save them for a moment. 40 years, 8 years. I won't go back. It was awful last week trying to read those. I'm not even going to attempt that. Okay? Not only have I butchered the King's English, but I've butchered all this other stuff too. So, what happened once that judge passed away? They all went back to doing what was right in their own eyes. And they started to digress once again into immorality, paganism, worshiping a false god. And when it got so bad, what would they do? They would cry out to God. And God would send another judge. So this is that story. And it happened partly because there was no unified leadership in Israel. There were 12 tribes. They didn't want God as their leader. And because they were serving their own self-interest, it just depended, Kate, on the situation as to what they were going to do. And they weren't going to work together because self-interest says, if I let Anna have part of my mission here, she may gain more than I want her to gain. So it became a real problem. Okay? So this is really a kind of a twofold problem here. They've rejected God, and they won't work together. It sounds a lot like the United States. We've rejected God, and we ain't going to work together. Okay? So you can see all kind of application in this story. You can see personal application. And personal application says, when I don't do what God tells me, whether I do part or nothing, bad things happen in my life. Bad things happen in a country. And so this is the story. This is why Judges is so important. Now, when they reject God, and God gets through using the judges, by the time we get to the end of the book of Judges, they don't want to just have rescue from God with a judge. What do they want? They want a king. Now they totally want to be like every other nation. And so when we get there, you're going to hear this little saying, you go tell the nation of Israel what a king's going to do to you. He's going to take your daughters and your sons. He's going to make them slaves in his palace. They're going to take your wealth. They're going to take your land. They're going to make you serve them every way possible. That's what you get with a king. Now, raise your hand if you want a king. And all 12 tribes said, that's us. So this is a horrible set of stories, okay? Horrible set of stories. But these fill the block between God's leadership, a monarchy, a king. So we're in that middle span. And it's just the Wild West. So to go back to Judges chapter 6, we're going to pick up in verse 11. This is a very familiar judge. Most of them are not that familiar. The first one was Othniel. I think I had an aunt named Othniel. Evenel. How come in the South we have these kind of names? Yeah. So we're biblical, right? We're biblical. I'll give somebody a piece of pound cake if you can just tell me how the word Hephzibah came to be known in this church. I mean, go find that one in the Bible, okay? So anyway, Judges chapter 6, verse 11. Downward spiral, God picks them up. They do good for a while, then they go down, God picks them up. Verse 11, now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the Terebinth tree, a Terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash an Abiezrite. There again. While the son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Verse 12, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. Underline that in your Bible. Because what did the angel call him? A mighty man of valor. And I'm sure Gideon's sitting there going, who are you talking to? It can't be me. Y'all do remember the story of David? When the prophet was sent to Jesse's house, and he looked at all the young, strong, strapping sons of Jesse, and the prophet said, is this all you got? And Jesse said, well, I got a son in the sheepfold over here. He's the runt. His name's David. And the prophet said, that's the one I want. So lesson number one is God doesn't always see people the way we see people. And God doesn't always see us the way we see ourselves. One of the things, and you've heard me say it when I was preaching from the pulpit quite often, especially to our young ladies, do not let the world tell you who you are. Now, that's equally true for young men. That's equally true for young adults, middle-aged adults, and older. If you're not careful, the world will tell you who you are. And the world will always put limits and it's this false thing in your head. God tells us who we are. Amen? Gideon, you are a man of valor. Mighty man of valor. Verse 13, and Gideon said to him, please, sir, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? That's a logical question. Why do I look around and see all the problems that the people around me have gone through? All our tribes, all the 12 brothers, all the 12 tribes have gone through turmoil after turmoil after turmoil. And if that is true, if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened? And where are all the wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? This is important, because what this young Gideon is saying is what I would say, Jim. If this really is who I am, is this really who we are, then how come I look around and our enemy seems to be stronger? And they keep putting us into this little box, and life is not good like it's supposed to be. But yet, remember that institutional educational program God put into the lives of Israel that we went through? Every Passover, we celebrate the fact that God brought us out of Egypt. He's our deliverer. He sent a mighty deliverer. His name was Moses to bring us out. Why is this happening? Well, why is it happening? Because these knuckleheads don't do right. Okay? Our fathers recounted, did not they? Brings us out of Egypt, but now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hands of the Midians. Do you think Gideon has a real optimistic attitude about all this? Have you ever been in that place in your life where you just kind of seem to have lost hope? I mean, it's easier to do than it. When people tell me, well, I don't know, I'm just always looking up. First thing I want to do is kind of step away from them just a little bit. Because aren't most of us going to have some problems in life? We are. Now, when you're young, you don't think you're ever going to have a problem, right? When you're young, you're smart, your mind works right. You don't worry about losing your keys. You don't worry about losing your car. But you ain't going to stay that way. Somebody say amen. Eventually, you're going to get, what's that word? Old. And you wake up and you go, okay, in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to try to get to the kitchen. I mean, and if I can make it there, hopefully the auto timer on the coffee pot will have already kicked in. And then I can sit down and have coffee and pray that nobody calls because I can't find my phone. So all this happened. Verse 14, and the Lord turned to him and said, now notice that word Lord now is inserted. This is not just a voice, this is God's voice. Do y'all have a capital L? Okay. It's the angel of the Lord. It is speaking as if the Lord are the Lord. And he says, go in this might of yours and save Israel from Gideon. Do not I send you? And so he's telling Gideon, he's already called him a mighty man of valor. And now notice what he says to this little Gideon guy. Go in this might of whose? Yours. And to quote, what was the little fellow that used to say, what you talking about, Willis? I mean, you can't be talking to me. This is the same kind of story. Remember when young David, King David, and it's the same kind of dynamic. He shows up bringing some food and stuff for his brothers, and the Philistine army's on one side, and the Israel is on the other side, and there's a big dummy standing in the middle. Y'all remember what his name was? Goliath. And young David says, what's happening? We can't get past Goliath. He's too big, he's too strong. And you remember what David said? Why is this uncircumcised Philistine thumbing his nose at a holy God? Picks up a few rocks and does what? Puts him on the dirt. And he chops his head off. God sees people a lot different than we see ourselves or each other. You go in the might of yours and you save Israel from the hands of the Midians. In verse 15, and he said to him, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Now, we read this with almost no emotion. But I can tell you something. He's about 3 foot off the ground. He's got the high-pitched voice of a 12-year-old girl. Okay, we sometimes read it too black and white. But this is filled with emotion because what is happening in Gideon's mind? Have you lost your mind? Now look what he says. How can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. You called me a mighty man of valor, but I'm telling you, Lord, that I am from the weakest clan, and I'm the smallest member of the weakest clan. I am nothing. And you want me to go do what? Save Israel. Put yourself in the mind of Gideon. Has God ever called you to do something that was infinitely over your head hard to do? Some of us have. I remember when I first felt like God was calling me to do something. Now, here's the part with the ministry thing. I mean, I told Michael about this back when he was, 5'3" when I first got him. I said, sometimes it's hard to distinguish what God's calling you to do because you just have this on your heart and mind that God's called you to do something. But the something can be very different over time. So I go down to church that Sunday, and I go down at the altar call, and Brother Ass Fuller was my pastor. Had been my pastor for all my young life. And I said, Brother Fuller, I think God's called me to some form of ministry. And so he stood up. Praise God, Rick's been called to preach. And better than that, he's going to be preaching tonight. And I went into full Gideon mode. First, I had to go by the bathroom and clean out. Well, never mind. So I grabbed my Bible after church, lunch, and I went down to the pasture, and I tried to preach to some squirrels and some rabbits to get some kind of acclimation to this thing. And that night, I preached my first sermon. It was awful. It has not improved a great deal since that time. But I know how Gideon felt. I became consciously incompetent. Have you ever felt consciously incompetent? I knew that I did not know, and I knew that I could not do. I was aware of my frailty. The problem is you still got this call from God on your life to do something. And the something starts with a step of faith. It may not be the next step. It may take a left or a right, but you have to start with a step. And then God will kind of direct you from there. And so when I read the story of Gideon, I can't help but go back to those days in my mind and go, this does not make a lot of sense to me if I'm Gideon. So I wasn't satisfied with that. So by the time I got to junior college in Dothan, it was like indigestion, Juanita, Hiawatha. You know what I'm talking about. It's like indigestion. You take a few Tums and it goes away. Well, it was just indigestion. That's what Mom and Daddy used to tell us about falling in love with somebody. Son, don't get mixed up over love and indigestion. Both of them will give you heartburn. So I'm in Dothan. And I'm involved with the BSU back then, Baptist Student Union. We call it something else now, BCM. Anyway, First Baptist Dothan had come down and said, okay, we would like for y'all to put on a program at First Baptist Dothan. And I'm just sitting there now. I really ain't even paying attention. Matter of fact, I think I had my pocket knife out, and I was cleaning the grease out from under my fingernails. And the guy's going around, he's going, now, y'all, you do music, and you do this. And he looked at me and he said, and you're the one who preaches, right? Now, I had told God, if you want me to preach, you're going to have to send somebody to come get me. Okay, this is where I was terrified of this thing. And so I'm sitting there going, and this is the way God had to deal with me because I was not the brightest bulb. And so sometimes how we see ourselves is not how God sees us. As a matter of fact, the story of David says, God looks not as man does, but he sees the heart. And so this is Gideon. And so this judge is particularly important. The rest of them are just there. They're just there. I mean, they don't even know much about them. This is the first long narrative of a judge. And so he's offering up excuses to God. Have you ever done that? I can't speak. I can't sing. I can't teach. I always know when I approach people and I say, would you be willing to teach a class? And they say, I'll pray about it. I know to go on to the next person. Okay? Because when I say I got to pray about it, guess what answer I'm going to come back with normally? No. Because I've convinced myself that it can't be done. So let's continue on with the story. And the Lord said to him, verse 16, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. Now, the story's getting a little bit better because God said, what? At least I'll be with you. Isn't it always better when you got a friend in it with you? I told you all about my experience when I was in Maryland, how God used some very important people to bring my life into some form of submission. And that's what it was. It was just a form of submission. I didn't have a lack of knowledge. It wasn't a lack of input. It was a lack of submission. And so this is that same thing. At least I will be with you. Verse 17. Now the other part of verse 16 I don't like is, I will be with you and you will strike them as one man. The one man's problem for me. Would it be for Gideon? You know, it's kind of like, you go up there as a group, and when you look around, the group has done gone home. And I've been there. I've been to a few places I don't want to have to tell you all about, but I looked around for my buddies, and all of a sudden, there wasn't no buddies. Verse 17, and he said to him, if now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that you speak with me. What's Gideon now doing? He's in negotiation mode. If you will do this, God, then I will do that. Have you ever done that? Lord, show me a sign. I asked for a sign. I said, Lord, if you want me to preach after that disaster at Shady Grove, then you're going to have to send somebody to come get me to preach. And what did he do? He sent, by God, he sent somebody. By God, he sent them. And so he's in negotiation mode just like most of us have been in. We've been there. I already don't want to do it. But because I don't want to sound like I'm being arrogant to God, I just want to negotiate. If you will give me a sign, look at verse 18. Please do not depart from me here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you. And he said, I will stay until you return. So Gideon went into his house, prepared a young goat, unleavened cakes, of flour. The meat he put in a basket, broth put in a pot, and brought them underneath the tabernacle and presented them. And the angel of God said, take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on this rock, and pour the broth over them. And he did so. And the angel of the Lord reached out the tip of his staff that was in his hand, touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire sprang from the rock, consumed the meat and unleavened cakes. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his side. Now, Gideon has put out, what do we call this? A fleece? And God has responded to this. That's enough, right? I mean, wouldn't that be enough for you? Well, no, it wouldn't. You'd still be negotiating if you didn't think you could do this. Verse 22. Then Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord, and Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace be to you. Do not fear, you shall not die. What do you think was on Gideon's mind? Fear and anxiety? If you had gone to his kitchen at midnight, he'd be sitting around it with a coffee pot. And in my family, the ashtray was never half full. It was always full. So, y'all grew up there? Why are all these things worse at night? Why always scarier at night? Verse 24, then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, The Lord is Peace. To this day it still stands at Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. That night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and the second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Ashereth that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of the stronghold there. The stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it a burnt offering with the wood of the Ashereth that you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night. Remember the dynamic in Egypt when God used Moses to deliver them? There were how many plagues? How many false gods were there in Egypt? 10. So this is that same dynamic. This is that Baal worship. This is that pagan worship. That God's not going to just say, I'm going to deliver you, but I'm going to destroy the perception that this thing is a God at all. And Gideon said, I'm with you, boss. Except I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it at night when nobody can see me. Gideon ain't totally bought into this thing, is he? He's halfway doing it. Verse 28, when the men of the town rose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was broken down, the Ashereth beside it was cut down, and the second bull was offered on the altar that had been built. And they said to one another, who has done this thing? And after they had searched and inquired, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. Then the men of the town said to Joash, bring out your son that he may do what? Now God's told him he ain't going to do what? He ain't going to die. For he has broken down the altar of Baal, cut down the Ashereth. But Joash said to all who stood against him, will you contend for Baal, or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down. So God is not just pressing Gideon to be a deliverer of Israel, but he is pressing him to put down the pagan gods there. Y'all remember the story of Elijah? That was actually the first sermon I ever preached that Sunday night. Do you still remember it, Mom? No. I wish I didn't remember it either. And what did Elijah do? He called out all the false gods. And it got to the point where even he said, listen, y'all build an altar, a sacrifice. Just keep pouring water on mine until I tell you to stop. And after God got through, he had consumed not only their altar, his altar, and killed all of them, 450 of them. You see, God's not just concerned about the physical army around. He's concerned about those things being attached to him in a false way. If you go over to Ephesians 6, you don't have to go there because we don't have time. You're going to hear Paul say something like this. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against powers and authorities in the heavenly places. God is not pleased when people try to have a rival. Can I tell you something tonight? God has no rival. There's not anybody close. There's nobody that can stand toe-to-toe with a holy God. And that's what he's doing here. He's making a point, not just of deliverance, but a point of, I'm the only God that matters. Verse 32, therefore on that day Gideon was called Jerubbaal. And I say that one real fast, about 12 times. That is to say, let Baal contend against himself because he has broken down his altar. Even Elijah finally looked at the false prophets on that showdown on the mountain and said, is your God just stuck in the bathroom? Really, go read the story. Hey, y'all need to call him because he must still be in the bathroom. But he didn't come. Verse 33, now the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people of the east came together, and they crossed the Jordan and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers throughout all of Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers of Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, and they went up to meet him. Verse 36, then Gideon said to God, now, what is he still in? Even though he's got people following him now, he's still in negotiating mode. If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hands, as you have said. And is it so? And it is so. So when he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece, it wrung enough dew from the fleece to fill a bowl with water. That would have been enough for me, right? How about you? Then Gideon said, well, let your anger not burn against me, Lord. Don't lose patience with me. Let me speak just one more time. Please let me test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece only, and on the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night, and it was dry on the fleece, and only the ground was wet around it. So, is God being pretty patient with Gideon? Is Gideon a very reluctant warrior? Yes, we'll stop there because we've run out of time. We'll pick up. The rest of the story is even better. It gets better, okay? Any prayer requests tonight before we close our time? Continue to pray for Allie Mae. I went by, so she's doing good. She's already fussing, so she's good. Hopefully she's not watching this because she'll get on to me. She was already spouting off orders, so she's good, right? Also, Savannah, they had their child, so pray for her. We got about 3 more different couples, Michael, 3 more. And we got twins, and pray for nursery workers. Don't go pray about it. Just go on down there and get your hand in a dirty diaper and be done with it, okay? Take your turn. All right, any others? All right, Jim Daughtry, if you're awake, would you please dismiss us?